Hey everyone, welcome back to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. For my next segment, I'm joined by Joy Biscornet, one of my colleagues here on the college admissions team. Hey Joy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ian, it's good to see you again.
It's been forever. Like I've almost forgot we worked together. But now here we
Exactly.
are and collaborating once more. And we want to talk today about engineering.
hmm
Now, I'm going to let you go ahead and answer this question. Why are you the right person to come on our show and talk to us today about engineering options?
Oh, because I have a history in engineering that a lot of people on our team don't actually know about. So before I got into the wonderful profession of assisting students making their choices and supporting them through the college process, my very first job out of college was in the engineering field because I have a Bachelor of Science degree in engineering. So, although I no longer use those skills on a daily basis in my professional life, I do have some expertise in engineering since I spent 4 years of my life studying the subject and then several years working in the profession in different ways.
Good. That's great. I would have gotten close to that, I think, if I had taken it, but maybe not quite quite so perfectly. Now, I think about engineering as, and this is probably the philosopher in me, right? But like an engineer looks at the world in a particular kind of way and wants to solve problems in the world in a particular kind of way. But there are many different varieties of engineers. Now, tell me why I'm wrong about that or right. And if that's generally how students should be thinking about engineering opportunities when they're looking at college.
I love having this conversation with you because I'm the engineer by training and you're the philosopher by
Right.
training. So
Right.
I think that we can have a great conversation. So you are correct in terms of engineers looking at the world and with an eye to solve problems.
Mhm.
So I think the big difference when people are thinking about what's the difference between a scientist and an engineer is
Mhm.
that a scientist is observing the world and explaining why it is the way it is to us. They're looking for the why. Whereas an engineer is looking at the world to say, how can I create and innovate to solve the problems that we are observing in the world? So a scientist is more a why about the problem. The engineer is more how can I solve it? So there is you need to have that scientific background to
Mhm.
be an engineer, but
Right.
it's the application of the scientific foundations that we learn to solve problems in the real world.
So yeah, if I'm going to be an engineer and I want to solve problems, I have to understand why they're problems to begin with, because that's going to help me to come up with the best solution. But ultimately, my core mission is how do I figure out a solution to this as opposed to continuing to identify what the problems might be.
Right, because if you're just continuing to identify the problems, that's more of an academic pursuit, um,
Right.
where
Right.
research comes in. The engineer says, I see the problem and I want to come up with a solution.
So if I'm a young student, let's say middle school, let's say early high school, it could even be later high school, but I think by then some students have started to answer this question. But let's talk mostly about early on. How do I get a sense of whether engineering is right for me? There are a
Mhm.
lot of students out there that'll say, I want to be an engineer, but when I ask them some of the why, I think they have some challenge in answering that question. What are some experiences that might point a student towards engineering or might help them to feel confident that it's the right choice for them?
Mhm. I think if you find joy or fulfillment in looking at something and saying, how can I fix that? How can I make it better? If you're always looking to say, I don't just want to understand it, I want to make it better. I want to solve a problem. If you're a student, regardless of how old or young you are, if you find it interesting to solve problems, then I think that's a good sign that engineering might be a path for you.
Hmm.
Um, if you like to tinker with things, There are stories of, oh, when I was a kid, I liked to pull apart the toaster oven or like pull apart an old computer and put it back together.
Yeah.
That wasn't my kind of curiosity. I liked to build things. So you know, I didn't have Legos. I had a grandfather who turned his garage into like a workshop, and he would let me go in and take old like pieces of wood and create things. So I liked working with my hands. I liked seeing something in my mind's eye and seeing how I could actually create it with my hands and the tools around me. So those might be some things that if they resonate with you or you're listening and you're a parent and you're saying, yeah, my kid likes to do that,
Right.
then that might be a sign that engineering might be a path for them. Like, I love cleaning my vacuum cleaner because I get to pull it all apart and then put it back together. And I don't pay attention to where the parts are going because part of the fun is being able to figure out how to get my
Oh,
vacuum
no.
cleaner back together.
No, when I take stuff apart, I'm taking photos all along the way because I do not want to forget where that little thing is supposed to go.
But that's the fun of it because then you
No,
get
it's
to
not
take it
fun. It's
apart
not
and
fun,
try
man.
it again.
No, I need this dishwasher to work. I need it to work. It's not
So
fun to forget a piece.
I think that's also part of that engineering mind
Yeah.
or the mindset is that it's trial and error. So it didn't go right the first time. Try it again. And for some people, they want to know exactly what they have to do, get it right, follow the directions, and done. There is this experimentation or a little bit of adventure to say, yeah, these are the 10 pieces laying on my floor right now that I have to get back into my Dyson. How am I going
Yeah.
to do that?
If I am so quick now at replacing the heating element in my oven because I did it wrong like 3 times. And now I could do it like a jackrabbit, man. I know exactly where to go,
Like,
exactly how to remove all the parts. So maybe I'll be an engineer one day.
well, maybe you'll be the type of person who likes to converse with engineers because you have that right language and vocabulary, and you can appreciate the excitement for a more technical subject, but you don't want to be the one who designs the solution.
I want to talk a little bit about language and vocabulary. There's a couple different things I want to pick up on here, but this is one that I really want to drill into because I have a lot of students that I work with who are interested in engineering. They want to apply to an engineering school. Great. That's awesome. But they still need to write essays. And often the essays that they need to write need to explain their interest in the major that they've chosen or talk about when they first became interested in the major that they've chosen and different permutations of that kind of question. And I find that the more successful applicants are the ones who are better at talking about what their interests are in this space. So,
Mhm.
how can students practice this? How do they engage in conversations about what they like about engineering? And how do they avoid the cliche, the conventional, right? Like a lot of, and it's not bad to say, I like taking things apart and putting them back together, or I like finding solutions to challenging problems. But I think that there are layers of complexity and engagement and interest that students can pile onto that to make a more interesting narrative. What's your thought on that? And what's some advice that you would give to students as they're thinking about that part of the application process?
It's really easy to say, I like taking things apart and I'm putting them back together, or I like problem solving. That's superficial. That's kind of where you start in thinking about an interest that you have, or but to try to get at the heart of what it is that drives you or that sparks that interest in engineering, you really have to think about the why behind it. So, what are the aspects of building, like if you're on the robotics team, what is it about being on the the build team or the build sub team that really engages you? How does it help you learn the different concepts that you're using? So I think it's reflection, thinking
Mm-hmm.
about the why behind your interests And also giving as much attention as unappetizing as it might sound to writing. You know, you have to be able to communicate effectively regardless of your subject area. And that's a skill, that's a life skill. It's not just a skill that students who are studying the humanities or the social sciences need. You need to effectively communicate throughout your life. And that's one of the reasons why I pursued an engineering degree within a liberal arts college, because I knew that I had to be able to communicate. There is, I think, a cliche or a stereotype around engineers that they are not good communicators, that they're good at solving problems, but they don't speak the same language as people who are outside of the
Right.
engineering world.
Right.
So if you can develop your writing skills and have conversations with individuals that are outside of your circle. So, if you have friends at school that are not involved in the coding team or not interested in hackathons or whatever it might be that you're interested in, have conversations with them and then try to ask them about what their interests are and then try to explain what you are interested in without using all the technical jargon. I I do that with students all the time when we're talking about essays. They'll use abbreviations or they'll talk about equipment that
Right.
I'm unfamiliar with. And I'm saying you have to remember that an engineer is not reading your college essay. Someone who has a philosophy degree is
Right.
reading your essay and they're not going to know what CNC means.
Right.
So you have to be able to explain it to them in layman's terms or non-engineering terms.
That's right.
And I think reading, writing, having conversations with people that where you have to explain your interests in what may seem like a really simplified way can be so beneficial to your future.
I agree. And this is something that I really reinforce for younger engineering aspirants, is that it would be really great for them to practice communication, both in terms of engaging with inputs in reading and also in terms of writing and speaking about their interests. So I'm glad to hear you say that. And I think it's something that I would want to really stress to folks who are listening, right? This is not something that can be undersold. It is very, very important, not just for the admission process, but I think for the long-term success of professional engineers as well. That communication is big. Um,
And if I could just give you an example from my college experience. So, in any lab that I was taking, I had to do a lab report. So, my
yeah,
peers and I would spend hours in a lab and then we'd have to explain our results. And we were sitting in a computer lab one day trying to write our lab report, and one of my partners leaned over and he said, "You're really good at the writing part. How did you know how to say that?" And I took that as a really big compliment at the time because I didn't think that I was a good writer, but
yeah,
amongst my peers, I could take what they were saying and synthesize it in a way that you could understand. So, and I started practicing that in college. And I took AP English, even though I didn't necessarily want to, because I knew that that was going to help develop a skill that I needed regardless of my profession.
yeah. I happened to have a lunch with a Reed alumna almost a decade ago, and we got together. And she'd been a physics major at Reed,
Hmm.
and she went into optics for a graduate program. She got super interested in that area, and I was asking her about her success in that space. And she said, I was about middle of the road in terms of the engineering content. I could hold my own, but I wasn't the best engineer in the space. But I was by far the best at communicating what I was doing and why I was doing it.
Hmm.
And I found that to be really compelling testimony for that kind of humanities social science foundation to her instruction. And
Hmm.
now she works as an engineer for one of the major Silicon Valley companies in the optics space. even though she started as a physics major at a liberal arts college. So there are a lot of different pathways to engineering outcomes. And I think that, this communication ability is something that I wouldn't shy away from if I was a student who's interested in this space. Joy, we might not have to make this another segment where we can talk a little bit about different fields within engineering and lots of different ways that engineers create solutions to the problems of the world. In the 30 seconds that we have remaining, is there anything else that you would want aspiring engineers to understand heading in, especially these juniors that are applying this fall?
Uh, Communication is so important, developing those skills as we talked about, but also if you are really interested in engineering, I can't stress enough that you have to have a deep interest in math and physics. Like math and physics are at the root of your engineering curricula. So if you don't like math and physics, engineering might not be the right fit for you, and that's okay. If someone had told me that, that might have changed my decision.
Well, you ended up where you're making a huge impact all the time, right? In a roundabout way, you had to stop with engineering and you did some other really interesting stuff. And now you're here with us at College Coach and helping families understand this stuff, which is great, right?
Right.
You
I'm
made it.
using my engineering degree in a different way.
That's right. Exactly.
Yep.
Joy, thanks for coming on the show. This is fun.
Thanks, Ian.
All right, folks, when we come back, we are doing our final segment of the day, which is how you can support your high achieving students. So don't go away. We'll be right back.